What's up, guys? Welcome to this all-new CB Sports Card podcast. Very first episode on this new channel. Some of you guys probably recognize me as the card boss from my previous channel, and I made a decision to start a brand new channel to focus just solely on sports cards. And I'm going to talk a bit about that before I get into the meat of today's video, more like an introduction to this channel, what this channel is all about, what I want to do, and obviously you can see new setup, right? Got some new equipment, something that I've been thinking about for quite a fair bit of a while. So decided to just buy some new equipment, got some new lighting, hopefully it looks a bit better, improve a bit on the sound, hopefully it's all good. And I want to do this kind of long form discussion channel for quite a fair bit. So just a bit of a history, right? So the Card Boss channel, which some of you guys are probably familiar, has been around for about 4 years now, 3 years or 4 years, I think, can't remember, but got about like 1900 subscribers, and I was doing pretty well in terms of the audiences during the pandemic, where I talk about a lot of trading cards in general, sports, Marvel, F1, Star Wars, and amongst other things, Magic the Gathering as well. But took a break for a while due to focus on some of my work, and as some of you guys probably know, I transitioned to become a full-time selling sports cards, and I had finally found the time to, I would say, re-engage back in my audience this year and to build more content. And I do definitely have a lot of content lineup for that channel. But what's happened is the quality of the content in terms of the type of content was well received. Definitely get some awesome feedback for some of you guys, awesome reactions, right? But they were struggling to get the reach into in terms of viewerships, and I was trying to understand why, and I realized that a bunch of my existing viewers, audiences are still on the Marvel card. So therefore, when I talk stuff, primarily sports this year, and nothing about Marvel, so a lot of my videos kind of go untouched or unviewed, and that kind of like messed up the algorithm a bit. So I know I tried to work on it to upload more frequently, but after a while I just realized that maybe what's best for me to deliver new content to you guys is to just start a brand new channel. Obviously, don't know how many views I'm going to get on this video, but hopefully the topic will be interesting enough for people to kind of search and just to look up this particular video on this topic, and maybe see where we go from there. So with that out of the way, I'm going to talk about today's topic, and it's a question I get asked not just by my audiences but also to some of my friends who I met up recently due to the New Year's. It's Chinese New Year now. It's a time of meeting, catching up with your friends and family, and a lot of them asking what have I been doing for the last 12 months, and tell them that I'm selling sports cards full time, which a lot of people in Malaysia don't really understand or don't really comprehend what kind of job is this, right? To them, job is a job. Okay, so but in this video I'm going to talk about how I actually transition from most of us a hobby into a full-time business, and a business that generates more than 500k US dollars of revenue in year 2024. Okay, so let's get right ahead, and I want to start off by in general, most of us, myself included, we form a mass I would say group of people whereby we are interested in collecting, we're interested in buying, selling, making some money, but only 10%, I would say less than 10%, will kind of make a leap to, I would say, transition to try and sell cards full-time, because obviously a lot of us, we come with a lot of commitments. We have kids, wife, family, mortgage, so it's kind of hard to let go of these kind of things to dive into an uncertainty of running a sports card business, whereby, as you guys know, hobby collectibles, it's something that's not mainstream, it's not something that's essential, and therefore market is so volatile on this, right, that to the point that sometimes it's scary. We saw what happened during the pandemic when things really skyrocketed to the moon, and kind of like came crashing down shortly after. Right now, in this period between 2023 to 2024, it was one of the first years that we kind of able to see some steady growth and steady movements in terms of where the market is going. I couldn't pick a better time to start a business. Okay, so I think that what a lot of people are curious is, how do you actually make that determination aside, from being financially ready, right? A lot of us would totally say, no, look, I gotta have X amount of money in my bank account before I start. Yes, that's obviously true, and I mentioned that in one of my earlier videos, where you gotta kind of like sort out the other things in your life first that's important. Your family is important, kids' education is important. You gotta have savings set aside, because this market is indeed volatile. Okay, so when I was like most of you guys who are treating this as a hobby, there's actually no pressure when it comes to buying and selling cards, be it sports cards or Marvel or Magic the Gathering, because we have a full-time income. From that income, we do allocate to our essentials, and then there's this thing what we call disposable income, and we buy some cards. And whether or not the cards appreciate or depreciate, appreciate is great, depreciate and sell loss, it doesn't really hurt us as much. Or if we don't sell it, it doesn't really hurt us as much, because when next month rolls in, you get a new paycheck and start all over again. So the pressure to make money from your collectibles is not as great when you treat it as a hobby. But when you convert to become a business, it's a whole different mindset. And a lot of us dream about, hey, I wish I could do this. I love buying and selling cards. I wish I want to do this as a business. But a lot of people do, I would say, don't understand, but more like they don't actually comprehend the bigger risk and the bigger amounts of work that goes into running a business for sports cards, to the point whereby it does suck out some of the joy, of actually holding some of the cards. You do have to be very mindful about spending. You do have to be very mindful about margins and inventory holding, how much cash you have, and ultimately, because you don't have a paycheck, you do actually rely on the cash flows that's coming in from your business. So it's all these little things that people don't actually think about as much, when they're actually doing it as a hobby. Okay, because to them, buy and sell is no different. So one thing that's actually important that I actually noticed when running this as a business is consistency, doing things on a consistent basis. And it's easy to say that you want to do things on a consistent basis, right? Do this now, followed by so on and so forth. But what is consistency? How do you determine what is consistency? Do you know whether you're actually doing things consistently? Are you doing things consistently right or consistently wrong? Okay, so that's always a challenge. So when I decided to embark on selling sports cards in 2024, I did have a plan of what I wanted to do. Okay, so I knew that I was going to focus on certain areas, and I knew that what I wanted to be doing to get to a certain goal. Now, financial goals wasn't really the key target. Like, I didn't say I need to make 100,000 of profit or 50,000 of profit in a year. Yes, making profit is important, but the road or the path to generating profits is more important than the profit itself, at least for the first year for me running the business. So how I actually moved into selling sports cards full-time could be a bit different from some of you guys who maybe decided to just, okay, I'm going to set up a store, for example, quit my job and sell cards on eBay. Let's just go buy lots of inventory, list. Yep, that could be a way as well. But I was a bit more technical and a bit more, I would say, careful with my planning. And even though I knew I had a path of what I wanted to be at the end of the year, I set a 1-year goal for myself, but it was not a process of how to fine-tune that particular path. It's more to just try different things and find out whether or not those other things would work or what it didn't work. Okay, so I'm going to give you guys some examples in this video, so therefore maybe you could have some takeaways. The road for everybody is different. Okay, so I won't say that you got to follow what I do, but this is my learnings which I'm going to share with you guys. So since the beginning of the start of the year in 2024, I did determine that there are several key points into running a successful sports card business. Okay, number one, of course, inventory and cash flows, right? So obviously, if you had tons of money, you had lots and lots of capital, you can actually invest in tons of inventory, and you can sit on the inventory for the longest time to get the best results. But what if you're not that kind of person whereby you don't have that much of cash? Now, that's saying that not a lot means that you're going to try and start a business with 10 grand. Like I said, to be honest, 10 grand USD to start a sports card business full-time, it's tough. It's really tough. Like, I think to be comfortable to really begin a full-time sports card business, doesn't matter whether you're doing low end or high end, you gotta be ready with at least 30 to 40,000 USD in capital to start with. If you're targeting the mid-tier to higher end, doing the $500 cards to maybe a $2,500 cards like myself, which I'm running, you gotta perhaps be ready with maybe 50 to 100K capital to begin with, okay? So if you're not there yet, I wouldn't try to think about embarking on this journey, because no matter whether you get your strategies right, but the road to growth is just going to be tough. You're going to see improvements in your business. You're going to see that your business is making some money, but you're going to reflect back and have a look and say that, look, how much money I made is actually not enough to keep me alive, right? Not enough to put food on the table for myself or what more my family and things like that. So there is a level that you need to be at in order for you to, I would say, run the business comfortably to make a living. Okay, to some people say, look, you gotta try, it doesn't matter if you have 10K, go for it. Yeah, but when you're at 10K, the number of options that you have is limited. Of course, if you have 100K capital or 200K capital, that's a lot of money. You have more options, you have more ammunition to play with. Okay, but in my case, right, I started a business with about 50K USD in capital, and it's not just pure cash capital. There were cards that were brought into the business. It doesn't sound like a lot, okay, but for me, I do actually very conservative individual, whereby I'm actually very conservative in terms of how I value certain cards. So if a card to me it's worth, let's say, $500, in the market it could be worth more. Okay, it could, but I would say I like to look at the floor versus what the ceiling or the potential or even the median would be. So therefore, I'm not saying I'm keeping my expectations low, but I'm just saying that I'm being very conservative with all my numbers. So when I entered the business, I went in 50K with a mixture of cash and cards. They were actually on the low side in terms of valuation. So obviously, when I first embarked on my earlier transactions, I was actually making decent amount of money because I started off with a lower expectation in terms of how I value the cards. Now, of course, I'm not saying that I should undervalue the cards. Definitely, I would think that what is my fair value on it, or what's like the bottom dollar. Okay, most of us try to make ourselves feel better that my cards is worth this much, but to me, yes, it's worth this much, but minus another maybe 10 to 15%. Okay, so inventory and cash flows are obviously a key component for that. And next thing that, something to really consider is the fees. The transaction fees is the one that's one of the big killers for sports card business. Now, if you run a store, for example, right, there isn't really any transaction fee. Yeah, I mean, there are credit card merchant fees and whatnot, but the transaction fees are the overheads. In a sense, right? You have your rent, you have your utilities, you have employees. So you average this with, based on the number of sales that you have, and you got your kind of like your average transaction fee. So don't assume that because you have a store, you have zero transaction fee. You do. These count as well. So when you run online, you actually sell on eBay, you actually sell on Fanatics Collect, you sell on MySlabs. All these have transaction fees at various transaction fees and have pros and cons, right? So of course, generally people tell you that eBay gives you the most eyeballs, which is true. They have the most viewership in terms of people logging in, the ease of use on the platform, tons of legacy people just going in and buy stuff, right? And they sell from anything from low end to high end, lots and lots of people. That's where they're good, and that's where they're not good as well, because the customer base is so broad that if you're focused on a large consumer-based kind of products or a large consumer-based kind of inventory, that's great because you appeal to a large pool of audience. But if you're focused on something that's very niche, like sports cards itself is a niche, and if you're drilling down to, for example, mid-tier, that's a niche as well. So eBay may or may not be the right kind of platform. It could be, but it may not necessarily always be true. But one thing that remains consistent is the fees that gets paid. Everybody's the same. Okay, if you run a store, you pay a subscription. The other guy runs a store, he pays the same amount of subscription. The eBay fees are based on tier system. The first 2,500 you get minus what, 14%, 15%. And if you sell a bit more, then it's of course a bit reduced. But what's important is everybody pays the same amount of fees. There's no clear advantage on this seller and that seller. So obviously, if you have better feedback, you offer free returns. Maybe you get there a bit of a preferred seller, 10% on your final value fee. Yeah, a bit of perks here and there, but not really substantial. Like your seller fees gets reduced from 14% down to 5%. Unlike if you look at some of the larger consignment houses on eBay like Probstein, DC Sports. They may, I'm not 100% sure, but they may enjoy some form of better rates from eBay, being millions of dollars of revenue that they generate on that platform. So, and for me to compete on a space like that, you're not only competing with other individual sellers, you're competing with large consignment houses that has tons and tons of inventory. So while you feel that you have a larger audience to work with, but don't forget the audiences also has a large pool of sellers to comb through, and they've only so much time of the day. So when you compare to yourself, for example, as a collector, maybe you have a full-time job or you're studying, how many hours do you actually spend to scroll through eBay to look for cards? A couple of hours a day, maybe 2, 3, depending. Right? If you're a working adult, you have family, maybe after you put the kids to sleep, you run through eBay 2 hours, scroll through maybe like 4 or 5 pages of listings, okay, or maybe set some filters. You're bound to miss certain things, right? You're bound to miss certain cards. There's some deals there that you can't really capture all of that because the time is so limited, and the amount of cards out there in that vast market space is just huge, right? When I was actually buying cards on eBay for my business, this was a struggle, right? Especially when I'm trying to do this part-time initially before I moved to full-time. And even when I moved to full-time and buy cards on eBay, right, it's many hours of just combing through inventory, which was a lot of work to begin with. So some of you may have that, some of you don't. But for me, when I transitioned from a hobby to become business, that's one of the main areas of time that I spent to just comb through inventory, and not just from eBay, right, from other platforms as well. So I did a video on that on my other channel, on some of the other source areas that I look at, of course, Fanatics Collect, Goldin, as well as MySlabs, Card Hobby as well. So I don't actually source much on Facebook and Instagram because I'm just concerned about some of the deals that goes through, especially me located from Malaysia. So it's a bit of a challenge to try and deal with somebody abroad. If there's any issues, it's hard to really try to get a proper resolution. There's PayPal, but PayPal's not exactly the best as well. I think that some of you have some horror stories. I do have my own share of horror stories. Doing transaction deals going bad and trying to use PayPal to try to resolve it doesn't go well as often as you think. So having to understand transaction fees is actually important. So like obviously eBay, large marketplace like that obviously commands a higher transaction fees, and you compare down the line, you have others like Fanatics Collect. There's a tier system for Fanatics Collect. There's alt as well. There's uses the buyer's premium method. There is a Goldin as well. Okay, so obviously they have some level of tier. So for me, and I spoke about this many times on my other channel, whereby I'm exclusive to Fanatics Collect, and there's a reason, because they offer the dealer program that gives you based on tier, based on amount of revenue that you generate by quarter. They tag you kind of like Gemini level, platinum level, and so on and so forth, and that offers transactional fees as low as 4.6% or was it 4.16? Can't remember, but less than 5%, definitely for sure. Okay, which is comparable to just a PayPal fee as well, and miles way better than trying to sell a car on eBay. So there is a threshold, obviously, $200 and above, but that's an easy reach. Okay, so for me, it's kind of no-brainer. The only challenge was to try to do enough volume on that platform, and just to try to understand whether or not that platform offered the best range of customers. And throughout my learnings, I knew that Finance Collect was going to be the one, because based on the cars that's going to sell, the people who wanted to buy the players such as the Kobe's, the LeBrons, the Jordans, the cars that I sell most of, right, are all focused to get deals on Finance Collect. And the way the auctions work, weekly auctions, people can just plan their Sunday evenings to kind of just go on the auctions and to bid, right, and to track out every single day, put on a watch list of this one's ending on Tuesday night, that one's ending on Thursday, that one's ending on Friday, sometimes ending in the middle of the afternoon, and sometimes maybe you got to bid in advance because you're busy. So in terms of Finance Collect, and also let's say talk about Godin and all as well, setting a particular time, a fixed day where the weekly auctions happen, and it's easy for people to buy. And so going into that auction format is kind of like the auction format that I prefer, both as a buyer and as a seller. So and I chose Finance Collect because the stuff that people want to buy on the platform is the stuff that I enjoy selling as well. So it kind of like work out for me. And when I was running this as a hobby, as side business, I was actually running all sorts of players, because I was more interested in the Jordans, the Kobe's, the LeBrons. But I realized that put on eBay, people may feel that this is out of my price range, because obviously Jordans and LeBrons are a bit expensive. They want some of the current players, initially, which I didn't carry, right? Some like maybe the Jason Tatum's, Jalen Williams, SGA, some of the stuff that I didn't really have. And I found myself trying to segregate my plan, because I knew that those codes were consistent in pricing. It was always in demand. But when you come to ultra modern players, it has its ups and downs, and I think that a lot of you guys kind of know where I'm getting at with this. But with Finance Collect, the weekly auction format, there is a kind of like a DNA of certain cards that you should be putting on that platform, and those kind of customers who seek those kind of cards always on the lookout for those kind of cards on that Sunday auction. So it kind of worked out well for me. It may not work out well for some of you guys who maybe focus on different kind of cards, different kind of price range, maybe a lower end. Lower end doesn't really do as well on Finance Collect compared to like eBay, for example. So it depends on you. But for me, when I knew from the start that I was going to transition full-time, this was where I was going to hit it. But in 2024, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to miss out on other opportunities. So of course, I tried to beef up my eBay store, sign up for a store, try to do all the things to try to become eBay seller, try to boost the feedback. But of course, run into several issues, and I touch a bit about that on my other channel, whereby eBay is kind of strict on customer satisfaction, and because of I don't do that high volume compared to some of the bigger eBay stores, so I run into some of those issues, as well as things like items not delivered, returns, right? All sorts of nightmares on this thing. So kind of like just gotta do it, gotta try it, just to make myself tick the box that it's not working out for me, and find something that actually works for myself. So I felt that was one of the right things to do and move on. So the next challenge was, in order for me to enjoy the full perks on that Finance Collect dealer program, I got to make sure that I get enough revenue. And that's where, coming back to the earlier point that I mentioned to you guys on having enough capital to run the business. So as just for example, the highest tier dealer program, you require 400,000 of quarterly revenue. That's 133,000 of revenue per month. Okay, now, to break it down for you guys, right, just to see how my train of thought actually works. If you have just a $10,000 capital, right, and it's almost impossible to generate $133,000 of revenue in a certain month, even if you could take the 10K and spin it every 3 days, like you buy a car and you sell it every 3 days and earn a little bit of margin, right? It's almost impossible to get $133,000 in a particular month. So obviously you need a bigger capital to kind of hit that number. Okay, even 50,000 was initially was a bit of a stretch. But what that means is, if you're putting 50K, you have to kind of like turn that 50K into revenue, rebuy inventory and resell inventory 2.5 times in a month, which means that you needed to actually do about, I would say, turn 50K of inventory every, say, 10 days, right? Maybe 11 days. Technically, it's impossible as well because you have to factor in things to account like shipping, and if you're buying from eBay, there's authenticity guarantee. Things get stuck, not lost in the mail, but USPS and things like that. So impossible. So definitely, in order to achieve that kind of target, you definitely need a big capital to keep rolling. Now, that doesn't mean that to achieve 133K of revenue, you need to be ready with, let's say, 300K of capital, right? And assume they're going to put 300K of cash into the inventory and sell, let's say, 1/3 of your stock every single month. Yes, that's a theory as well. But with cards, you can actually, what we do, the compounding. I think you guys are aware of that. And that's the beauty of sports cards, talk about compounding, okay? So with, let's say, for example, about 70, 80K of capital, or maybe let's say 100K to be safe, right? 100K of capital, and you invest in certain cards or you buy certain cards to move, okay? Some cards are pending, some cards are coming here and there, okay? And you flip certain things on a weekly auctions, okay? Maybe you move, let's say, on average, maybe 70K or maybe 35K every week, maybe 70K every 2 weeks, depending on how you flow inventory, and you multiply it by 2, that's basically 140K a month, and that's how you hit the target. So, but without sufficient capital, it's impossible to hit those tier. And why the tier is important, I mentioned to you, at the highest tier, the transaction fee is only 5%, and that's where you make your money, because gone were the days whereby you could buy something and you sell it at a 30% markup or 50% markup, right? Some people say double your money. It's tough. Those margins are so thin on cards already these days. You're talking about 10%, 12, 15 maybe, okay? So for me, once you take away the transaction fee, sometimes you're working with just 5%. That's as low as that, okay? So if you're trying to go with a platform transaction fees of, let's say, eBay 14%, and your aim is to make 5%, you still got to mark it up by 20%. It's not easy to buy something online that has comps, okay, people know the comps, and to try to sell it at 20% more expensive unless that player suddenly just hit a stride and become the most popular, or you get something very unique, or you get something from a break pack that you open at a low cost price. But if you're buying something to flip, okay, it's technically almost impossible to try to make 20% returns consistently. 7 to 10 maybe, and that's why keeping the transaction cost as low as possible was the real key for me to build in 2024 to get to where I am today. And a lot of people are focused on buying the right cards, thinking of what cards it's going to make the next big jump, going to grow by 20, 30% or 50%, going to make the next big leap. Yes, that's important. It's nice to speculate. It's nice to get those things correct. But for me, I'm working on the little nitty-gritty stuff, right? Just to make sure that I get my transaction fees as low as possible so that I have more room to play with, right? If I sell something and make 30% gross margin before transaction fees, awesome, right? Take away the 5%, I make 25% on that. But even if I sell something for 7%, it's fine. I still make like 2%. It's okay. It's not great, but still profit. But if I was making 7% on a platform that's like eBay and paying eBay 14%, I'll be technically making a loss. So that's not where I want to be. Okay, so therefore, transaction fees were important. And that's coming back to the margins I was talking about. So for me, we get the transaction fees down to 5%, right? The margins were, for me, 5-7% after transaction fees. To me, is considered awesome. And you're probably thinking, how is that going to survive, right? Well, if you think of it logically, right? If you watch on YouTube quite a fair bit, people going around to deals says, hey, I want to buy things at 70% comps. I've tried to do that at shows. Okay, it's not easy. Okay, you see that on certain channels on YouTube, going around. Yep, I'm gonna pay 7% comps, 80% comps. That's what I'm doing. Yeah, and you see a deal gets done, people sell. But in reality, that doesn't happen as often. Maybe if you watch a channel and you watch a video and it happens 3 times in that show, That's probably the number of times it actually happened in that show out of maybe 150 people that they meet, because not everybody is willing to take that kind of haircut, because comps are comps. People know the comps. Right? There's no reason for me to sell something to you at 70% comps unless I'm desperate to move that car out, okay? Unless it's like I just need cash. But otherwise, if I'm a collector, if I'm just like what I mentioned earlier, if I'm not doing a business where I'm not concerned about cash flows, I'm not concerned about taking money to feed myself or feed my family, right? It's just a hobby in general. Why would I want to take a loss, right? Unless I have no interest of keeping a card, or maybe I want to buy something else and I just didn't want to come up with my own money, so I don't mind taking a hit. And that's the only time whereby you're willing to sell something at a loss or at 7% comps, maybe. Okay, but in general, you don't actually do that. So when you run a business, you're thinking that, this is so easy. Just go around, go to a show, set a table. I'm buying, put a big sign. I've seen that before. Put a sign there. I'm buying at 80% comps. Sell me your things. I'm loaded with a lot of cash. How many people will walk up to you and do that? Yes, there will be some, because just want to unload some stuff. You get some people just want to cash out so they can buy other things or to buy packs. I've seen people that before in a Hong Kong show. But normally you don't. Even as I'm buying, right? I'm not even talking about 80% comps. Even some I see 90% comps. Maybe you don't even get. Yeah, you attract 90% comps. You come and say, no, I'm going to pay 80, 85, and say, no, it's not going to do it, right? So what I'm trying to say is, if you're playing with such little margins, right? You're talking about like 90% comps, and with just 10% to play with, the transaction fees become super important. Of course, if you're saying that, yep, I'm going to take it back to my store and I'm going to sell it, because store obviously has fixed overheads. You're going to pay rent, you're going to pay employees, utilities, regardless. So it's best to have tons and tons of as many inventories, as many things to offer your customers as much as possible. Yep, that's a fair strategy. That's why you can see some of the big stores are Card Collector 2, Cards HQ. They buy tons and tons of inventory, and people are willing to sell to them because they just need to fill up the shelves. Okay, but as an online seller, as somebody with limited capital, and you're thinking that, yep, I got 50k, I'm just gonna put out a sign that says I'm gonna buy at 7% comps. You're not gonna get that. It's not so easy. It's not so easy, right? So I think that the way to go forward is you have to, of course, consistent revenue. Talk about consistency revenue, and I'll let you guys know on the platinum path, right? 133k in a month. It may seem as though that's impossible, but if you do inventory or sell at just 10% markup, minus 5% for transaction fees, you can make 5%. It's still decent, okay? And you get to turn the stock quicker, as opposed to trying to list something, trying to make that 25, 30, 40% markup, or maybe I've seen some guys to just wait for the best offer to see which guy is gonna give them the best deal and make tons of money. You wait. Yeah, if you're in no hurry, you're a collector, that's fine, you wait. But running a business is about consistent cash flow. Keep the thing rolling, because if you're doing 133k or 130k a month at 5% margin, okay, technically that's about what? How much is that? 6 grand of profit. Not a lot. It's decent. 6 grand. Okay, redo it next month, 6 grand. But if you're going to use that 6 grand to kind of like put back in the business, sooner or later your revenue on 133k a month is going to grow to become 150 easily. Okay, because you're putting back the money to buy more inventory, earn back another 5-6%. Sometimes maybe you're going to make those deals that you're going to earn like 15-20%. Sometimes you're going to make a loss. So obviously, I'm still weighing the pros and cons of buying certain cards, because I always weigh the upside and both the downside of certain things that I buy as well, because I want to make sure that I don't want to lock in one card, and I don't want that one card to really swing my entire P&L for the entire month. I really got bitten by that with the Victor Wembanyama Superfractor 101 from Mercury. That was, how much was that? $8,000 loss in just one swing, 2 weeks. Poof. Killer. Okay, and that literally killed my P&L for one whole month. Without that deal, right, my P&L looks so much different. So learn that, never get caught up in emotions. I'm not saying I didn't do any homework, kind of like I just pictured myself doing something different with the card, and then the moment I just locked in, it was huge regret. So stay in your lane, know what you do best, especially when you run a business, right? You gotta really be laser focused on the plan on hand, and just stick with your plan, keep it consistent, keep it going. The only downside of all these kind of things is basically it sucks the fun out of it. Right, it's scrolling through cards, to look for deals, to look for things to buy. May not be as fun whereby you're just looking for cool things to buy. Right? I enjoy looking for cool things to buy, but cool things may not sell well, or cool things may be too expensive. But you gotta do what's right for your business. Okay, at least initially. Maybe if you make tons of money, and you're doing super well for yourself, you can indulge on a couple of cool cards for yourself. Okay, maybe like once or twice a year, buy something that's that you feel doesn't matter what the price is, doesn't matter what it will sell for, doesn't matter what the long-term value is, but something that you find enjoy, because I realize this kind of like the reward to yourself for this journey. Okay, so that's basically it. How the difference in transitioning from a hobby to a business, a 500k business, as I said last year. Could I have done more last year? I think I could have, if I just stuck to a singular plan, or maybe not to deviate so much. But 2024 was a year of learning for me as a full-time reseller. So I did put some time and did mentally prepare myself to take certain risks, make some decisions that would expect to make some loss, and really I did make some loss on some of them. But 2025 coming in, it's a whole different year. I expect to do well for sure. Okay, I'm off to a good start. I did a video on my other channel on the weekly sales, week 1 sales of 2025. I think that some people did DM me and ask me, what's the follow-up? What's week 2? What's week 3? Yep. Apologize for that. All right, I was just trying to figure out what's the best place for me to put that kind of information. So I want to talk more on this particular channel, where it's just solely dedicated to sports cars. And this particular channel, I'm not going to do things like maybe a PSA reveal, and the latest news of what's going on. I'm not going to spend some time to talk about that. I think it gets covered greatly and repeated many times. And I'm just going to talk about business, talk about finance, things that for people who are interested to run this business, or already running a business currently, what are things that they can pick my brain, or maybe share as well in the comments, or maybe reach out, maybe some things that we can brainstorm. That'll be interesting as well. And because I believe there's a lot of people who are like myself, or aspire to be like myself, which kind of just try to transition from a hobby to a full-time selling, which, as I mentioned, is not an easy transition. The mindset has to change, and the amount of things they need to really set for yourself is very different when you're actually working a full-time job that gets a paycheck every single month without any worries. Alright, so that's it for episode 1 of the CB Sports Car podcast. I hope to talk more in future. I hope this version of a long form content is not too boring. I want to keep engaging you guys. If you guys have any topics that you want to talk about, sports car business in general, do hit me up, do send me questions. Welcome tons of that. I got many more topics on business and finance, about business in general for sports cars, that I want to share on this particular channel. So thanks for watching, guys. If you guys want to watch all my other content, still called the Car Boss Archives, there's still my old content there. I've not taken down any of them, but on this channel I'll be talking on brand new content in this particular format. So first video, 0 subscribers, 0 views to start with, so we'll see where does this one go. Okay, if you like this content, do follow me on the channel. If you like it, do subscribe, and let's get this ball rolling so I see where I can contribute myself back to the hobby. All right, thanks for watching, guys. Till next one, out.